It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story.
Why won't you apologise to the people you've hurt for your comments?
Lee Anderson doubles down on his comments about Islamists who he said have got control of the London mayor after getting the whip suspended by the Prime Minister.
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip.
Obsessed with violence, Scarlett Blake, who live-streamed killing a cat, is given life for the murder of Jorge Martin Carreño. Also tonight, the man who fought against Putin's presidency, Alexei Navalny, in one of his final interviews before he died in prison.
The entire Putin elite is absolutely corrupt, and it is absolutely colonially minded. They have moved all their families, their children, their assets to the West, and they treat our country as a free hunting zone, and that's exactly how it works.
The price of baby formula milk is cut at one supermarket after a Sky News investigation reveals the lengths families are going to feed their children. Brussels is swamped by hundreds of farmers in tractors as the fight continues to spread across Europe over the rising cost of agriculture. Pressure on the Premier League after Everton's punishment is reduced following an appeal. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The Prime Minister has called comments made by the former Deputy Conservative Chairman about Islamists wrong and ill-judged. Lee Anderson, the MP for Ashfield, said Islamists have got control of the Mayor of London. He then lost the whip after he refused to apologise. Well, today he called his own words clumsy, but doubled down on his criticism of the Mayor. The latest row, now engulfing the party, is yet another issue for Rishi Sunak to grapple with, as our political editor Beth Rigby reports.
This is the first time there's ever been a cabinet in East Yorkshire.
Election year and the PM's top team on tour, here in the North East to talk transport investment.
So with that, let's get to work.
But behind the public smiles, this party's splintering again. This time over Islamophobic comments made by MP Lee Anderson, the former deputy party chair, now suspended.
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words. We're going to win this year.
Yes, I'm positive we're going to win and retain Ashfield and you're the bit of Prime Minister next year.
Yeah, that's the plan.
This just a few weeks ago. Harmony back then turned into discord now.
Do you accept your comments that you've been called a racist from your party?
Oh, no, I've got a phone call to make.
This normally outspoken politician today less keen to talk.
Why won't you apologise to the people you've hurt for your comments?
After Mr Anderson claimed Islamists had got control of London and its mayor Sadiq Khan, who he said had given our capital city away to his mates. But Mr Anderson not backing down, his supporters calling on the PM to let the MP back into the party.
Lee is somebody who, more often than not, speaks a lot of sense. He does have a lot of support within the Conservative Party because of that. We know he's not a racist, but we're in a position where a colleague of ours has been suspended.
Other Tories don't agree.
I don't need any lectures from anybody who might have come from other parties or very late to the game to tell people like me that we're not true Conservatives. We're the true Tories, and this is our party.
The first Muslim to serve in a Conservative cabinet, Baroness Wasi, compelled to speak out.
I'm deeply concerned because this is not an issue which is just about my party and trying to root out racism from within that. It's about the kind of general election campaign that's going to be run.
Lee Anderson's upset a lot of his colleagues, but this isn't just about what he said. It's also about what the Conservative Party represents. Because what we're witnessing, be it rows over Islamophobia, climate change or immigration, is a battle for the soul of the Conservative Party after the general election. What will it look like? Leading figures, be them Suella Braverman or Liz Truss, are trying to tilt the party further to the right, to the horror of those Conservatives whose feet are planted much more in the middle ground.
That's where the housing is, yeah.
It's tough for a Prime Minister when he's trying to rally support away from Westminster. You know things are bad when it's easier for him to face the voters than his own MPs.
Let's speak to Beth then, who's in Downing Street for us tonight. And Beth, this underlines again how much the war in the Middle East creates its own backwash over UK politics.
Anna, that is so true, and aren't we seeing it in so many different ways now? A war thousands of miles away causing fractures not only in our parliament but also in our communities. What we've seen over the past week are the rows in the Commons that are spilling over into genuine concerns around MPs' safety, reports of a number of MPs having to have their security stepped up, 3 unidentified female MPs now having personal bodyguards. Now, if you look at the political parties, Labour, haven't they had their problems with anti-Semitism over the years? Well, it's now rearing its ugly head again in the party with difficulties for Keir Starmer amid rows over the ceasefire in Gaza or demands for it. You saw the Labour Party having to suspend, to withdraw support from the guy that was running for them in the Rochdale by-election. That will be held on Thursday night over anti-Semitic comments he had made. That's what's happening in Labour. And now look at the Conservative Party. Issues of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party have been much discussed, and now it is back with a party riven with very open divisions between MPs saying Lee Anderson made a mistake, but he's not a racist, these are not Islamophobic comments. And then you have a load of MPs on the other side saying this really is worrying, the guy can't be let back in to the party. And people like Baroness Warsi there saying that she believes it is Islamophobic and she believes it's racist. So you have these divisions on both sides of the parties, and really also what you're seeing now is it's about culture wars, if you like, and people, instead of trying to damp down tensions, bringing petrol to the fire and just stoking it all up. And I think there's questions for MPs across the political divide tonight about how they dial this up or down and the impact it has, not just on this place, but actually in communities across our country.
Beth, in Downing Street, thank you. Scarlett Blake, who murdered a man in Oxford and left him in a river, was sentenced to 24 years in prison today. The judge called her a killer who had an obsession with harm and death when handing her the jail time for killing Jorge Martin Carreño in 2021. Jorge's family paid tribute to an extraordinary being full of passion and kindness. Sky's Alice Porter reports.
Being arrested and also withdrawals.
It was 2 years after Scarlett Blake murdered a man in Oxford before the law finally caught up with her. The 26-year-old trans woman did not know Jorge Martin Carreño, but in the early hours of the 25th of July, 2021, she lured him to his death. It was the first night after lockdown restrictions had been lifted. Jorge, a Spanish national, had been out with friends, but became separated from them and ended up sitting alone in the city centre. Unfortunately, Blake had gone out looking for someone to attack. It was premeditated and planned. At 4 a.m, Blake and Jorge were seen in this CCTV footage before they walked away together. But Jorge never made it home. The court heard how Blake took advantage of Jorge's vulnerability, taking him to a secluded spot by the river, hitting his head with a vodka bottle, strangling Jorge, before pushing him into the river, where he drowned. Police investigations at the time couldn't conclude whether Jorge had been murdered. For his family, it's been 2 years of searching for answers.
Crimes such as this are incredibly rare. I want rather to focus on Jorge and his family and pay tribute to them and the enormous dignity that they have shown throughout this ordeal.
The court heard how Blake was obsessed with torture, death and strangulation. 4 months before the murder, Blake live-streamed herself killing a cat, dissecting it before putting the body in a blender. This gruesome crime was watched by Blake's partner, Aislinn Bell. It was a warped sexual fantasy between them.
You decided to kill someone because you believed Aislinn Bell would find it sexually exciting, as in fact she did. As you later said to another partner, you killed, quote, because my lover said it'd be hot. I am sure that you did derive pleasure from killing Jorge, as you had from killing the cat.
But the relationship between Scarlett Blake and Ashlyn Bell, a trans woman in the US, turned sour. And Bell told police that Blake was the person in the CCTV footage the night Jorge was killed. In August last year, she was finally arrested. At no point has Scarlett Blake shown remorse for the crimes which she has committed. It's understood she'll serve her life sentence of at least 23 years in a male prison. The incarceration of Blake will be some consolation to the family of Jorge Martin Carreño, who said his absence leaves a deep wound in our hearts. Alice Porter, Sky News.
A close associate of the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has claimed that talks were underway to include him in a prisoner exchange shortly before his death. Mr. Navalny was found dead 10 days ago at the Siberian penal colony in which he was being held. Now, in a never-before-seen interview, the Russian opposition leader is seen criticising the corruption in Moscow and in London. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this report.
He was a man with a deep love for his country and a profound belief in a better future for Russia.
I'm an optimist. I hope that this 20 years of Putin is not set in stone. We weren't doomed to it. We weren't meant to go in that direction.
The interview, acquired by Sky News and never seen before, is one of the last Alexei Navalny would give in full health. A few months later, he was poisoned before his 3 years in jail and then death in an Arctic labour camp. The interview shows Navalny for what he was, a young, charismatic politician offering an alternative to the theft and corruption of Putin.
The entire Putin elite is absolutely corrupt, and it is absolutely colonially minded. They have moved all their families, their children, their assets to the West. And they treat our country as a free hunting zone, and that's exactly how it works.
Navalny and his organisation fought with extraordinary courage against that alleged corruption with video exposés, claiming to show the lavish lifestyles of Putin and his elite, suffering raids and constant arrests. In a poignant moment in the interview, he makes it clear he knew the risks he was running.
Those who try to resist, let's say, they face the consequences quite quickly.
But some of Navalny's strongest words are against the West, and Britain in particular, for letting Putin and his cronies allegedly get away with it.
Why do corrupt officials still live in London? Because these corrupt officials feed a huge number of wonderful London lawyers. They will appear very civilized. We will be pleased to chat with them if they sit next to us. They will be wearing a tie and fine manners, and at the same time, they are serving the interests of utter, complete bandits.
It is a damning indictment of the way Britain has allegedly let Putin's cronies stash their dirty money abroad. The UK government has told Sky News it sanctioned 2,000 individuals, companies and groups, and is targeting Putin-linked elites in the UK. Corruption and kleptocracy, we were told, is not welcome on these shores. But there's still controversy over the UK's limited action following Navalny's death, targeting only officials in charge of his jail. Russians in exile who knew Navalny, like journalist Yulia Maneva, say he'd have regarded the latest sanctions as laughable.
He liked humour, so I feel like he would laugh at this point because of what we've seen in recent days. If this is everything that we're going to see from the UK in the response of Navalny's death, it looks quite weak and a bit pathetic.
For Alexei Navalny, the Putin years have been an aberration. Russia's destiny, he believed, is a freer future. His final thoughts in this interview, now all the more haunting.
Russia is a European country. All the people who live here want to live like Europe. So I hope that 10 years from now, if you interview me again, I'll be able to tell you how we managed to overcome the corrupt money laundering.
Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
There's better news for young families tonight after the supermarket Iceland announced it's launching the cheapest SMA baby formula on the market. It comes after a Sky News investigation last year which revealed that high prices were driving families to take dangerous steps to feed their babies. But let's bring in our national correspondent Tom Parmenter, who's in Macclesfield for us tonight. So more progress, it seems, Tom.
Yes, this is a big deal for parents because Iceland and Food Warehouse will see prices of £7.95 from tomorrow morning in store and online. And that's the kind of price for this SMA Little Steps that parents just haven't seen for quite a while now. Of course, prices across the board have been rising 25% over the last 2 years. And over the last year or so, here on Sky News, we've shown the desperate and, quite frankly, dangerous positions that babies are being put in because parents simply can't afford the prices in the shops. Well, now there is tangible action. Last month, we saw Danone drop the price of their Aptamil brand by 7%. The Competition and Markets Authority have the baby formula market under investigation, looking at allegations of profiteering. And now Iceland going a step further. Nestle, who own this brand that will be on this new lower price tomorrow, welcome the move, but they say it's down to retailers to set the price point. And campaigners and parents that we've spoken to tonight say, why is it down to one retailer to make all the running on this, that surely the government should be doing more? Well, that is something, of course, that we've seen in Scotland, where there has been more progress, offering families more cash-first solutions. But be in no doubt, this is a UK-wide problem. And while this is certainly welcomed tonight by parents and those charities at the heart of this crisis, there is still much more to do to fully resolve it for parents and babies.
Thank you. An investigation has been launched into 8 of the UK's biggest home builders after what's being described as the persistent under-delivery of new houses. The Competition and Markets Authority found fewer than 250,000 new homes were built across Britain last year, which is well below the 300,000 target for England alone. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
Well, there'll be 300 houses and they're going down through this area here.
A soggy corner of the Oxfordshire greenbelt that captures the housing crisis. The council wants to turn it into dream homes.
That is the site that's proposed for development.
Campaigners Lisa and Suzanne want to stop them. It's a pitched battle for land, green space and housing, played out in the planning system.
We're getting an awful lot of market-priced housing and not enough social and affordable housing being built. It would be much more difficult to object to the housing proposals if they were building the right type of houses in the right type of places.
Local disputes are a national problem, overwhelming a planning system competition regulators say is at the heart of a broken market, too reliant on private developers producing often poor quality homes.
We found that the house building markets across England, Wales and Scotland need significant interventions. And we've seen 2 key drivers there. One is the complexity and the unpredictable nature of the planning system, but the second is the limitations inherent in relying on private speculative development of new build homes.
In the 1960s and 70s, local authorities built hundreds of thousands of homes, shown here in yellow, augmented by housing associations in red. But since the 1980s, the UK has relied on private developers, a model that's failed to hit this government's target of 300,000 new homes a year since 2019. 8 of the largest house builders now face a CMA investigation into sharing price-sensitive information. But the industry wants reform.
In December last year, the government announced that it would no longer be setting local housing targets. There was a big watering down of that. So we need local housing targets to be reinstated. We need more urgency and better decision-making with regards to planning applications.
In a functioning market, Britain's housing shortage would lead to more supply to keep up with demand. But with planning delays and developers with an interest in keeping prices high, that hasn't happened for decades. And that's got implications from the pressure on local authorities to the prospect of younger people buying or renting their own homes.
Housing will be an election dividing line, Labour promising to review the Green Belt and build 1.5 million new homes, while government leaves targets to local authorities. Whoever's in charge, constructing a more effective market is a fundamental national challenge. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Oxfordshire.
A serving member of the US Air Force has died after setting himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington. Aaron Bushnell had said he no longer wanted to be complicit in what he described as genocide in Gaza. Sky's US correspondent James Matthews reports.
It was outside the Israeli embassy that Aaron Bushnell staged his protest, live streaming it on social media. We won't show the moment when he set himself alight, but it was immediately beforehand that the US airman explained his actions.
I am an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal.
At the gates of the embassy, the 25-year-old from San Antonio in Texas poured liquid over his head and set light to it, shouting, "Free Palestine." He died from his injuries in hospital.
The Secretary is following the situation. I know the Air Force has confirmed the airman's death. They do plan to provide additional information 24 hours after next of kin notifications are complete. It certainly is a tragic event. We do extend our condolences to the airman's family.
It was by no means the first act of protest in the United States, a country of significant influence over war in the Middle East. Conflict there stirs strong emotions here, a reality laid bare in shocking terms on Sunday. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
Farmers' protests have been sweeping across Europe in the last few months in countries including Italy, Spain, Poland and Greece. Farmers have been demanding action from policymakers on issues facing the sector, from cheap supermarket prices to trade deals. Well, in Germany, farmers are protesting about a plan to phase out tax breaks on agricultural diesel, which they say could lead to bankruptcy. Meanwhile, in France, farmers' unions have taken to the streets of Paris, fighting for improved pay and protection from foreign competition. Well, today, a convoy of farmers from across Spain worked its way through the capital. And in Brussels, as EU ministers met to consider more help for the sector, hundreds of tractors adorned with banners filled the streets and protesters clashed with police there. And it's from Brussels that our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons has this report.
Among Europe's farmers, the anger is boiling over. This was supposed to be a day of demonstration in the middle of Brussels to say that agriculture is facing intolerable burdens, but it descended into conflict. The police finding themselves under attack again and again. Even those farmers who simply saw the violence unfold said they could understand its causes.
I'm angry but not violent. Some farmers are getting violent, but I can understand in the basis that makes them so angry. Over the years we've had many discussions with the politicians and the parliament, and time and time over they've told us, we've heard you, we're going to make things change. Many of us are really starting to feel desperate.
Within sight of the European Union's main headquarters, the streets were being set on fire.
Well, we are within sight of the European Commission, but down here things have turned quite nasty between the protesters over there who are throwing fireworks, rocks, eggs, anything they can get their hands on, and the police who are using water cannon to try to control them.
Behind all this are myriad grievances about onerous regulations, paperwork, withdrawn subsidies and the effects of trade deals that have driven down prices. Many farmers think politicians just don't understand. What do you think of them? I asked Patrick de Dolodo, a Belgian farmer. The politicians over there, they're not serious people, he told me. Europe, he says, has too few exports and too many imports from places like Ukraine. Up the road, surrounded by police, the EU's agriculture ministers were meeting. They're under growing pressure to slim down environmental regulations faced by farmers. But outside, the city's streets scarred by fire, fighting, and even dumped manure. The farmers are showing no sign that they're going to back down.
Adam Parsons, Sky News, Brussels.
Hungary has approved Sweden's bid to join NATO after nearly 2 years of delays. Sweden applied to join the military alliance shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. But Hungary initially blocked the move and accused it of being hostile. Sweden will now become NATO's 32nd member country. The Welsh singer Charlotte Church says she is in no way anti-Semitic after being criticised for taking part in a controversial pro-Palestinian chant. She faced backlash after she led a 100-strong choir in a rendition of From the River to the Sea at a fundraising concert on Saturday. A cruise ship at the centre of a cholera scare has been given the green light to dock in Mauritius. Thousands of passengers spent 2 days on board the Norwegian Dawn after it was refused permission to dock, after several passengers reported feeling unwell. Tests for the infection have now come back negative. Well, there's no date yet for the general election, but that hasn't stopped the country's two main political parties readying themselves. Both Labour and the Conservatives are on an election footing when it comes to political campaigning on social media, spending more than 10 times so far this year compared to the start of 2023. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has been looking at the data.
Tax cuts. We all want them, right?
This is what today's election campaign looks like.
Well, have your taxes cut by the Conservatives.
The fight for your attention is well underway, and it's playing out on all of your screens.
Choose Labour and know that we have changed fundamentally.
A wave of political ads is hitting Facebook and Instagram. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on the social media campaign trail. And this is just the start.
We can show you that the main parties are acting like the election campaign has already begun. Now, this is how much the Conservatives and Labour spent on Facebook and Instagram ads in the first 5 weeks of last year. And in electoral terms, that's peanuts. Now, in the same period this year, it's more than 10 times that amount. Campaign season has kicked off. And let's look at it over time. Now, this goes back to the start of 2023, and you can see the spike just before the local elections. But then again, it spikes up even higher this January, which shows that the start of 2024 was the beginning of the long run-up to general election day, with Labour and Tories vying to spend more. And both parties are pumping out dozens of adverts. The Tories spent most when they're pushing this ad, celebrating tax cuts. Labour peeked around a message that Keir Starmer has changed the party. Really, only two of our political parties are in this race. Now, this is who is and isn't spending money online. Smaller parties are clear they just can't afford to keep up.
Hi, Sam. The parties know the messages you want to hear, but don't feel too special.
Now, I know the economy is your top priority.
For a different Sam, a different priority.
Hi, Sam. Now, I know you care about patients getting the care they need more.
And another one.
Hi, Sam. Like you, I think immigration levels are too high.
A new rule change coming in the data bill before Parliament now means you might be about to see a whole lot more.
Effectively, it sort of slightly loosens the rules for political parties. They'll be able to contact voters more easily. They'll need less permission to do so.
Voters should brace for a deluge of information through every platform and every mean this election.
I think there could well be a lot more contact of voters this election.
Who thinks that we need change?
New data rules and a big raise to the limit on election spending. The campaign cap has increased by 80% for the next election. The two main parties are going to spend those extra millions to reach you through your phone. Are the voters listening? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Everton's 10-point deduction for breaching the Premier League's profitability and sustainability rules has been reduced to 6 following their appeal hearing. The decision moves Everton up to 15th in the Premier League table, easing their relegation fears. Well, our sports correspondent Rob Harris is here with us, and this has certainly all been a bit messy, Rob, hasn't it? What are the implications for the Premier League?
Well, there are all sorts of questions over just how the Premier League governs itself, because this appeal board found that there'd been legal errors made by the original commission. They found 2 of Everton's 9 grounds for appeal were upheld, including the fact that they did act in good faith when it came to disclosures about their stadium debt. Also, that the original Commission was wrong not to take into account benchmarks of sanctions, as we see in other competitions where they're set out in advance just what sanctions could be imposed. And these 10 points was going to be the heaviest ever punishment imposed on a club by the Premier League. It has been reduced to 6, which is a boost for Everton. As for Everton, they are saying that the club feels vindicated in pursuing its appeal. The Premier League are insistent that the rules have been followed throughout, but others are questioning about the application of the rules, the questionable transparency and openness around how it enforces these regulations around profit and sustainability. Because Everton were found to have overspent by £20 million. They are allowed £105 million in allowable losses over 3 years. And there's worse to come because they've been charged again. And part of the new Premier League case that's ongoing does relate to an overlap of existing seasons heard in this case. So they could yet have another punishment still imposed by the end of the season. And not only them, Nottingham Forest have also been charged with breaching the rules. And the final appeals for those cases, whenever the verdicts come in, might not be known until the season is over. So relegation might not be decided until after the final kick of the Premier League season, which is a very messy situation. And beyond that, we're still awaiting the biggest Premier League case, just what happens to Manchester City, and there are 115 charges which won't be resolved this season.
Rob, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers and the press preview. Tonight, joined by the Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the Independent's political correspondent, Zoe Grunewald. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Eye. Its headline, Hunt has 6 days to find tax cuts to save Tory MPs. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister has called comments about Islamists made by the former Deputy Conservative Chairman, Lee Anderson, wrong and ill-judged. Scarlett Blake, a killer said to be obsessed with violence and death, has been jailed for 24 years for murdering a man she targeted as he walked home in Oxford. And Alexei Navalny's allies say that he was due to be freed in a prisoner swap before his death in a Russian jail. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Independent's political correspondent, Zoe Grunewald. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight, I know. So to the front pages, let us start with the Eye. Mounting pressure on the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to deliver tax cuts in the next budget, according to the Eye. The Guardian also highlights the Chancellor's financial plans, with experts from the IFS telling them that any case he has for tax cuts is weak. Financial Times front page, Sweden clears its last hurdle to join NATO as Putin's war shifts the alliance's borders. The Metro leads with the sentencing of so-called cat killer Scarlett Blake, who's been jailed for life for murdering Jorge Martin Carreño in Oxford. The Daily Mirror reports that around 100 children per day are falling victim to sextortion scams. The Telegraph reveals that the Ministry of Defence has been forced to suspend a new military accommodation plan amid a huge backlash from army wives over its rules. Meanwhile, The Sun reports on Friends star Courtney Cox possibly joining a celebrity spin-off series of BBC's hit TV show The Traitors. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers for yourself while listening to our guests. So let's head straight to them. The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Independent's political correspondent, Zoe Grunewald. Welcome to you. So, Lee Anderson, should we kick off? Your paper, amongst others, then, Zoe, leading on this and the ramifications for the Conservative Party.
Yes, so this is going back to Lee Anderson's comments over the weekend about Islamists, about Sadiq Khan, and, of course, Rishi Sunak's comments today where he wouldn't call the comments Islamophobic. He said they were wrong. He defended his decision to suspend Lee Anderson, but kind of wouldn't use that phrase that a lot of his colleagues are now calling for him to use. Obviously, those within the Labour Party as well are calling it Islamophobic, racist. But the PM has stopped just short of saying that, which has raised questions about how seriously the party takes this issue and why they're not willing to use that language.
Yeah, talk us through about Lee Anderson. You know, one of those politicians to reach parts of the electorate that the rest of the Conservative can't. Used to be a Labour councillor, of course, so he's already flip-flopped a bit, hasn't he, in terms of his political allegiances. Do they need his voice? Or, you know, beyond what he said now, you know, is that part of the party they still need to support, do you think?
Oh, definitely. And, you know, Lee Anderson has sort of become known as the Red Wall Rottweiler. And when he was appointed as Rishi Sunak's deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, I think the idea is that he could sort of speak in a language in which Rishi Sunak potentially couldn't. You know, he sort of sounded like people who come from the Red Wall. He's an ex-miner. He's a bit more strident with his views than Rishi Sunak. And he's sort of actually quite a useful outrider for the Prime Minister and for the Tory party. The problem is, as Robert Buckland said earlier, is that if you have an attack dog, don't be surprised if it ends up biting you on the hand. And I think that's exactly what's happened. He has gone too far with his comments in the eyes of the Prime Minister and the eyes of a lot of people. The question is now, what do you do about it? Because he's suspended, and it's almost as if the decision to suspend him was the easy part. The decision now is whether or not you end up re-admitting him before the election, and that is a choice which Rishi Sunak is going to have to make. And he's in a bit of a bind now, because if he doesn't re-admit him, then potentially you're going to get pincer movements like Reform eating into that vote if you don't think you're taking what Lee Anderson's saying seriously. But obviously, if you do admit him back into the party, you're going to open yourselves up to allegations that you're not taking Islamophobia seriously.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that comes from this. One, you know, should the policing of these pro-Palestinian marches be done better? 2, will he join Reform? And what does that mean electorally for the Conservative Party, do you think?
Yeah, so, I mean, to the Reform point, we know that Reform is actually starting to nibble away quite significantly at the Conservatives' vote share. We saw this a little bit in the recent by-elections in Wellingborough. And even the by-election this week in Rochdale, we're seeing that the Reform Party might well be quite a considerable challenger. I'm not sure they're going to actually win, but they are definitely talking about this sort of vote share that they'll be able to pick up. So there's definitely concerns from the Prime Minister
and their candidates receive threats, I think, hasn't there?
Yes.
Richard Tice has, put in a formal, complaint or whatever you call it to police about that. So, yeah, sorry, Zoe, continue.
Well, and Rochdale's a perfect example of this, where actually these kind of discussions around anti-Semitism, around Islamophobia have really come to a head. And this has been quite a major part of some of the campaigning, some of the issues in Rochdale. And what we're seeing now is actually 2 challenger parties, the Workers' Party, headed up by George Galloway, and Reform by Simon Danczuk. They're actually far more likely, I think, to be contenders for that seat than the traditional parties, Labour, the Conservatives, because both of them, and indeed the Green Party as well, have all failed to kind of root out these issues within their party, within their candidates there.
Well, the Times is just in. I'm proof that Britain isn't racist, says Sunak. Rishi Sunak has declared that he... I can't read it with my glasses on, obviously. That's too far away. He is living proof that Britain is not a racist country as he sought to contain a growing row over Islamophobia. The point is that, they have taken action. Is that enough, do you think? Or will people want investigations into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party at least opened, which is what we hear from Saeed Avasi, for example?
Yeah, well, those are certainly the calls starting to bubble up in the Conservative Party now, and I'm sure they will be taking that seriously. It's interesting, isn't it, with this word Islamophobia? Why is the Prime Minister and senior ministers almost refusing to use this word? I think one is probably political, and they don't want clips before the election of them talking about Islamophobia because it sort of embeds this idea that there could be a problem. But also, it's interesting the point that Kemi Badenoch made yesterday on Twitter, where she says that we refer instead to Islamophobia as anti-Muslim hatred. And because if you adopted Labour's definition, you'd almost be saying that this religion is beyond reproach. And she is saying that you would create blasphemy laws by the back door. And so I think that if that is the reasoning which the Conservatives are giving for dodging this word almost, they need to make that point a bit stronger, because at the moment I'm not sure most of the public will be too au fait with that.
Yes, and Suella Braverman in The Telegraph condemning as hysteria this row about Islamophobia. So, it's again yet another thing that splits the party. While, Labour's had its own issue about anti-Semitism in Rochdale, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, this is an entirely predictable intervention, I think, from Suella Braverman. I mean, she actually wrote an op-ed earlier in the week talking about this same kind of issue. And it's very interesting that Braverman has made very similar comments. But it's Lee Anderson who has been suspended from the party. Suella Braverman obviously remains in place. And she's a very powerful figure on the right of the party. We know she had quite a lot of control when she was Home Secretary. And that when she was forced out the role, that was quite a significant point in Sunak's premiership. So absolutely, we can see Braverman is wading in here, and she's kind of defending some of those comments and the right to kind of critique Islam. But I think, going back to what Jack said, I mean, there clearly is an issue here, which is when does criticisms or questions about religion become obviously quite clearly problematic. And I think it's very, very hard to argue that the comments that Lee Anderson made weren't entirely offensive, weren't Islamophobic, weren't, very, very unpleasant, and shouldn't have been said by someone who's not only an MP, but someone who was deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. And we've seen that the Prime Minister has been willing to distance himself from those comments, but stopping short, as Jack said, from actually using the word Islamophobic.
OK, we'll move on to the budget, shall we? In the papers, not surprising. Just over a week to go, although we all get confused in February because it's such a short month, don't we? Anyway, experts warn Hunt over this dubious case for unfunded budget tax cuts. So is he in a pickle, and what's likely to happen? Yeah, and it is the worst-kept secret in Westminster, and in fact probably the world now, that they are going to be cutting taxes at the budget. They see it as a pre-election gift, and hopefully they can woo some voters over. The question now is by how much they can cut these taxes. And the IFS, in a briefing earlier, made the point that they have very, very limited scope to do so unless they're going to take a massive chunk out of public services as well. And it is this constant tussle between public services or tax cuts. And I think that at the moment the Tories in a bit of a bind with this one because, they have to placate a lot of people
Tory MPs who want them to cut taxes. Obviously, taxes, the tax burden is at the highest since the Second World War, and so they are massively under pressure to do that. However, if they do that at the expense of public services, once again, they're going to open themselves up to allegations of austerity 2.0. They're not funding things properly, and so it's very difficult for the Chancellor. But I think that we're going to see him try and cut taxes here. One, because he has to show that he's getting that tax burden down. But two, I think that he could probably invest billions into public services and wouldn't get that much credit for it because people don't feel it at the moment. Potentially, the argument is if you go for tax cuts before the election, people might actually feel it in their pockets.
Yes, and the junior doctor strike's still underway as well. So, that has ramifications for the health service. And depending which paper you read, depends whether they want to see more spending on public services or they want tax cuts. The Eye is also leading on this. Hunt has 6 days to find tax cuts to save Tory MPs. The Tory MPs where exactly in their constituencies?
Well, there's a number, it's quite a vocal portion of Conservative MPs who are calling for Rishi Sunak to bring down the tax burden. And I think Jack's absolutely right in that people aren't feeling well off, not just because of the tax burden, but also because public services are really not functioning adequately. And the IFS's report basically says if you do choose to use this money to create tax cuts, then public services are going to suffer. And it's not going to be the ring-fence public services like the NHS. It's going to be courts. It's going to be higher education. It's going to be local councils. All these things that are absolutely a breaking point. We know the court backlog is 2 years at the minute. So
council taxes are going up 4.99%, just under the 5% that requires a local referendum.
Precisely. And people might think, oh, it's great. I've got 50 quid in my pocket this month extra. But if you can't get an NHS appointment, if you can't, if everything else around you seems to be falling apart, you don't feel better off.
So what do Sun readers want then, out of interest?
I think they want the tax burden to come down. I think at the moment there's hardly any difference really between Labour and the Tories in their economic policy, from what I can see anyway. You have sort of window dressing around Labour wanting to clamp down on non-doms and VAT in private schools, but it doesn't actually raise a certain amount of money, right? It's pretty much chicken feed in the grand scheme of things. And I think that a lot of people are feeling that they are being absolutely squeezed to the pipsqueaks when it comes to tax at the moment. And so things which are actually going to make a difference to people's lives, so personal taxes, whether you're talking about income tax, national insurance, fuel duty, these are all the sort of things that Jeremy Hunt will be putting in the mix before the budget on March 6th.
VAT? No.
Potentially VAT, you're talking about growth,
Yeah, absolutely. Financial Times now. Just checking which one we're doing. This is about James... Well, it says Sweden here, doesn't it? Oh, right, front. NATO, sorry. Yes, Sweden clears the last hurdle to join NATO. It's taken, about 600 days, is it, for Hungary to approve this?
So lots of kind of congratulations on social media tonight from the Defence Secretary and all kinds of politicians who are very happy to see that Sweden have finally been allowed to join NATO. As you said, Hungary was holding that up for some time. And obviously this is really significant. We're at a really key point here. Not only is Putin's invasion of Ukraine really kind of ramping up, we're talking about the future of relations in Europe, and of course also potential presidential candidate Donald Trump is talking about America's future in NATO. So it's sort of more important than ever that the allyship looks really, really strong. And I think people will be very pleased to see that Sweden, which is this really kind of geographically important part of Europe in terms with its Russian border, is now protected and joining forces with the rest of NATO.
OK, we'll come to your story after the break. And also on the front of The Sun, which claims that Friends star Courtney Cox is potentially being lined up as the first signing for the celebrity version of The Traitors. Back in a moment.
For me, the word disability is not negative. So if this is how loud we have to scream to get some answers, then I'm actually quite thrilled that it's happened. I think for a very, very long time, we've been coming into the workplace, shying away in another room, going through horrendous symptoms in some cases, but feeling like we can't talk to our employees about it. So for me, if this means we get more care, more support, a bit more understanding, I'm over the moon about it.
I think it makes for a great headline, and I don't mind that. So to give you some of the stats, 13 million women in the UK are currently in perimenopause or menopause. 50% of those women don't get any medical care at all. 25% of women in perimenopause or menopause consider leaving the workforce, and 10% actually do. So if we are now having this conversation as an entrepreneur who's built and sold 4 businesses, we shouldn't ever write women off. Women's careers are not linear. Diverse teams produce better outcomes. And I think that the menopause and recognising the business of menopause and the economic contribution of women in perimenopause and menopause is really important.
An employee could effectively sue that employer. And just being a cynic and knowing how the world works, could that backfire, this headline that you welcome, Debbie? Because it may well put off employers employing mature women, which, let's face it, is a problem in the workplace anyway. Another excuse for men to write women off.
Well, this is the argument, isn't it?
It is the argument, but maybe this is just entrepreneurs are universally positive. You know, the glass is always half full or kind of overflowing onto the table. But couldn't we say that about women at any stage in the workforce? Haven't we been saying that about women who are of childbearing age? That they shouldn't be employed, that it's too difficult, that they can be sued, that maternity... I think, you know, it is far better for the conversation to be had and for the conversation to be had with men. Because throughout my career of building businesses that target the female audience, which is what I've done, as you know, we've got to bring men with us on the journey, right? We've got to bring men with us because the majority of economic power still sits with men.
How beautiful would it be to have that amazing conversation with your employer and for them to say, what do you need? What can I do to support you during this, let's be honest, in certain cases, very, very tricky part of your life? And then something amazing could happen.
Well, welcome back. Heading to the press preview in just a moment. Just quickly, some breaking news. Joe Biden, about to go into TV studios, has said that he hopes to have a ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Gaza by next week. It's a political visit to New York on Monday. He said he hopes to have the ceasefire in place by March the 4th. So that is next week. We will bring you more on that and possibly even envision those comments from him. So hopes of a ceasefire coming early next week. The words there of the US President. So let's return to Sky Papers then and bring in the Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the Independent's political correspondent, Zoe Grunewald. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to your story in the Sun, shall we? Which is James Cleverly talking about an international crackdown on illegal immigration. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, is going to be making a big speech tomorrow about migration. Viewers might be a bit confused that he's making it in the US, in New York. Why is that? Well, that's because he's sort of banging the drum for an international approach to tackling migration as he sees it. So it's not just about stopping these small boats coming over here, which is sort of the sharp end of the migration crisis, but he's talking about more returns deals with other countries. He's talking about more intelligence sharing. He's talking about trying to stop it, as he sees it, upstream. So not just boats coming across the channel, but the actual overall flow of migration, which comes often through the Middle East and then across Europe. He's trying to stop it upstream. So it's interesting he's going to New York to make this speech. He's also hailing the Rwanda plan as a world beater and saying that Britain is pioneering this sort of deportation scheme. Obviously, at the moment, that is being gummed up in the House of Lords. We haven't sent a single person to Rwanda yet. But it's interesting how he's already trying to sort of position the UK as a country which potentially should be followed. Obviously, we've had a lot of problems with the Rwanda plan, and no one's going to doubt that. But, yeah, it's interesting how he's making that speech over there tomorrow.
Quick look at The Guardian, Zoe. Labour would help schools train young male influencers to counter the likes of Andrew Tate.
Yeah, so the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has said that to combat sexual harassment, Labour want to see schools develop role models to provide a counterbalance to people like Andrew Tate, who is an influencer who's known for his very misogynistic views on social media. It's a really interesting proposal. It's part of a lot of Labour's plans to kind of toughen up mental health provision in schools, to toughen up provision to have better guidance for young people, and to basically improve schools and the education that children receive in a kind of holistic way as well. And clearly misogyny in schools is a big issue. I mean, you only have to talk anecdotally to teachers, especially female teachers, to talk about the sort of misogyny they're experiencing. We've seen a real spread of it because of people like Tate on social media. Whether this will work is really interesting. You have to think about the resources teachers have to kind of teach young men. You have to think about whether it'd be better placed, this kind of work with campaigners.
I'm waving at you because we've run out of time. I just want to show the last story, which is The Sun. I do apologise. Friends and Traitors, All-Star Show wants Courtney Cox. Apparently a pal of host Claudia Winkleman appeared with her on a sketch for the show as well. So we'll wait and see, shall we? Got a line on that very quickly?
The Traitors is probably one of my favourite shows of the past few years. I must admit, I've never seen Friends, so I'm not quite sure who Courtney Cox is.
Extraordinary,
However, if it's The Traitors, it's going to be fantastic.
OK, so, yeah, the youth of today. See you both later. Thank you. Here's the weather.